The work on it lasted for some time indeed. We have been discussing it with our partners. Several routes were under consideration, each with its own advantages and drawbacks, and negotiations lasted for years. Demand for energy resources is growing, including within the Chinese economy, which continues to be one of the primary powerhouses of the global economy. There is no charity involved here from either side. These are mutually beneficial agreements implemented strictly on market principles, specifically those prevailing in this region. Moreover, the price of this product is determined not by current market rates, but by a predefined formula. I agree with those who believe that every country has a right to choose by itself the system which provides its own security. This applies to all countries, including Ukraine. But it also means that security of one country cannot be provided at the expense of another country's security, in this case, of the Russian Federation. We have always opposed Ukraine's membership of the North Atlantic Bloc, refers to NATO. But we have never doubted its right to conduct its economic activity the way it wants. This also applies to the EU membership. We believe every country should have these security guarantees and its security system. This also applies to Ukraine. But this has nothing to do with any swaps, especially land swaps. I want to emphasize that we are fighting not so much for the territories, but rather for human rights and the right of people who live on these territories to speak their language and stay within the culture and the traditions that they inherited from previous generations, from their fathers, grandfathers, and so on. I would like to remind you of first articles of the UN Charter, where it is stated that nations have a right to self-determination. But we do not link territories to security guarantees. Of course, we can say these topics are close to each other, but we don't link them directly. And this is not the way this issue was raised in Anchorage. It's a road to nowhere, just meeting with the head of the current Ukrainian administration. Let's put it carefully this way. It is possible to meet. I have never refused to do so, in case this meeting is well prepared and leads to some possible positive results. By the way, US President Donald Trump asked me to hold such a meeting. I said, this is possible. At the end of the day, if Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is ready, let him come to Moscow, and such a meeting will take place. What do I think about this? I think this is an unsuccessful attempt to absolve himself. Well, not him personally, but his country, and the collective West in general, of responsibility for the tragedy that is happening now in Ukraine. What do I mean? Let me remind you, I have already said many times, in 2014, ministers of 3 European countries came to Kyiv and signed a document that, in essence, was an agreement between the current government, between President Yanukovych at the time, and the opposition. And in accordance with this agreement, all controversial issues of a political nature were to be resolved within the constitutional framework, by peaceful means, by legal means. And literally in 2 days, or the next day, a coup d'etat occurred, bloody and cruel. None of these guarantors lifted a finger to return the situation to the legal framework. Immediately after this, the events in Crimea began. Immediately after this, the Kyiv regime launched military operations using armored vehicles and aircraft against the civilian population of those regions of Ukraine that did not agree with this coup. And then they derailed all our attempts to resolve this problem by peaceful means and, in fact, publicly refused to implement the Minsk agreements. So, who is to blame for the tragedy that is happening? Those who brought this situation to this point, completely ignoring Russia's interests in the sphere of its security. If someone thinks that it is possible to treat the people of our country so carelessly, they should know that we will never allow such things when Russia weakly watches the events happening around it and does not react in any way. Back in 2022, we urged Ukrainian authorities to respect the choices of people living in southeastern Ukraine, withdraw their troops from there, and end the conflict immediately. I must say, this proposal wasn't entirely rejected at first. However, after the insistent urging of our Western European colleagues, withdrew troops from Kiev, the situation changed rapidly. We were then told, almost verbatim, "Now we will fight until either you twist our heads off or we twist yours off." I don't recall if I've ever stated this publicly, but it sounded like that. Nevertheless, it seems to me that if common sense prevails, it will be possible to agree on acceptable terms for ending this conflict. Moreover, we observe the stance of the current U.S. administration under President Trump's leadership. We see not just their statements, but a genuine desire to find a solution. It seems to me there is a certain light at the end of the tunnel. We shall see how the situation develops. If not, we will have to achieve all the goals set before us through military means. All groups of the Russian armed forces are advancing in all directions. They are advancing successfully, at different rates, but practically in all directions. I will not list them. If you represent the Zvezda TV channel, you know the names of these groups and the directions of their combat operations. How does the enemy react to this? What we see is that he is trying to plug the holes, as they say, by transferring the most combat-ready units from one area that is quite difficult for him to other areas of combat operations, which he considers more critical. There is time to relax. Anything can happen. Ukraine could be readying reserves in order to carry out some actions of a more or less large-scale nature. But a preliminary analysis by our military specialists shows that the enemy does not have such capabilities today. They are not capable of conducting large-scale offensive operations and are only engaged in holding the existing lines. Ah, yes. I think the chairman spoke about it when we were walking to the parade. Oh yes, Mr. Berlusconi was actively into this topic once, the modern means of health support. Medicine, even some surgeries involving organ transplantation, allow the humanity to hope that the active lifespan will not be like today. It differs from country to country, but anyway, they allow to hope that the lifespan would increase considerably. I am absolutely convinced that Mr. Witkoff, in his contacts with me and other members of the Russian leadership team, conveys the position of the American president himself and no one else. Our negotiations in Anchorage demonstrated this clearly. The context of our talks made evident that he reliably communicates the Russian position to President Trump. Likewise, it became entirely obvious to me during the Anchorage talks that he accurately and objectively communicates the stance American leadership to us. It seems to me that the criticism against Witkoff comes from those who dislike this position, but they also dislike Trump's own position. It's the main thing. Approaches to conflict resolution can vary. Some advocate fighting until the last Ukrainian. Like some in Europe. Then there are those, such as representatives of the current U.S. administration and the president himself, who seek solution, moreover, by peaceful means. And so, the first party, the war party, always attacks the peace party. Everything else is mere speculation. and insinuations meant to bolster their own stance. Well, the US president is not without humor. It's clear. We all know this well. I have a good relationship with him. We communicate with each other on a first-name basis. I can tell you, and I hope he will hear this too, as strange as it may seem, but during these 4 days of US-Russia summit in Alaska, during the most diverse negotiations, both informally and formally, no one has ever expressed any negative judgments about the current US administration. That's the first thing. Second, without exception, all of my interlocutors, I want to emphasize everyone, supported our meeting in Anchorage. Everyone. And everyone expressed hope that the position of President Trump and the position of Russia and other participants in the negotiations will lead to the end of the armed conflict. There are no dates, no preparations are being made, but the invitation is on the table.
Второе. Все, без исключения, мои собеседники, я хочу подчеркнуть, именно все поддержали нашу встречу в Анкоридже. Ну, все. И все выразили надежду на то, что позиция президента Трампа, ну, и позиция России, а других участников переговоров приведет к окончанию вооруженного конфликта. Сроков неизвестно, подготовка к встрече не ведется. Вот, но приглашение на столе. Спасибо.